in a critical incident, is involved in a critical incident and needs to be administratively assigned to leave, then that's one form of administrative leave that we have. Most frequently, people think about an officer-involved shooting. Per policy, an officer is placed on administrative leave, not only for their mental health and well-being, but also so that two side-by-side investigations can take place. I think more specifically to kind of what you're getting at from a mental health, like a wellness standpoint, um, time off paid for by the city directly related to an officer or employee's engagement in law enforcement activities. So seeing something, hearing something, smelling something that gives them a certain level of trauma that they maybe need time off for, if I'm hearing you correctly. So currently under policy, under post-critical incident procedure, we have what we have termed traumatic leave. And essentially what traumatic leave is for is to give an officer the ability to take the rest of their shift and the following shift off, paid for by the city. And the thought process behind that is to give someone a couple REM cycles of sleep to help process that incident, whatever that is. And we use that, I won't say quite frequently, but as the peer support, as the co-supervisor for the peer support resiliency team, I have seen that utilized many times. And how that's initiated could be the individual officer or employee member coming to a supervisor and asking, an employee going directly to a peer support counselor and saying, hey, I think I could benefit from this. And then it's my obligation as a supervisor, as it is Emily's, to work with scheduling and the direct supervisor, whoever that specific employee is, to try and get them that time. Now, beyond that, rest of your shift and the following shift off that's paid for by the city, we as a peer support team on that individual's behalf can advocate for more time off. However, that would come out of that employee's accrual banks, whether that be sick time or vacation leave or compensation time. I believe that there has to be a higher level of approval. I think a lieutenant or higher for a certain bank. I don't recall exactly which one, but that's kind of, it's not, we don't call it administrative leave. It's called traumatic leave, and it's specifically for those instances. But it is only for those, that thought process of take the rest of your shift and the following shift off. And then we stay in communication with them during that time to see if more time is needed, but that wouldn't be paid for by the city.
Okay. Officer Clues, could you add to that anything?
Actually, I can't. He did a really good job of explaining pretty much what the function of administrative leave in that capacity is. The only thing I would add is that the term administrative leave actually gets used very frequently around the department for different purposes. Basically, it's a timesheet code that says that the city is paying for your time, but you're not actually conducting any work. That's really what administrative leave, the code itself, means. So we use it for a variety of different functions, but as far as what we're talking about here, I think Sergeant McCauley did a fine job of explaining my position.
Okay. I would like to review, if okay with you folks, some of the policies in Portland, which are somewhat more extensive than this, and provide for this is all outside the question of officer-involved shootings, which is state mandated and specified, and which we do have in policy. But they specify two kinds of situations: officers who are impacted by a situation and officers who are involved in the situation, and have different standards for providing them with time off. And they have wellness leave, which is bureau designated paid administrative leave to provide physical, emotional, or psychological support to impacted members immediately following a critical incident that temporarily and significantly interferes with the member's ability to perform their normal job functions. So they have both a policy that's not sounds that dissimilar from what we have, except it's more than 2 days. It can be up to 2 weeks. And dependent on the situation, and it can be requested by the officer, it can be requested by a supervisor, and the like. Then they also have modified duty, which can be requested or mandated from above. And they have requirements for an involved member, that's an officer who is involved in a critical incident that could be traumatic, shall attend at least one session with a licensed mental health provider before they return to work, including any modified assignment or training, and involved members shall attend follow-up sessions at 3, 6, and 12 months post-incident. Shall.
Can I ask a question real quick? I'm sorry, Jack, can I ask you a quick question? So does the policy say that if somebody steps forward and says, I need a mental health day, or I'm having a hard time with this, then there is with that, it will trigger all the shalls that you just listed? Because I fear if that's the case, people are going to say, I'm fine, I'm not going to deal with that. But I'm just throwing that out there.
This is possible. We would have to find out more from Portland about how that works. I will look through the policy and see if I can find an answer there, but I'm not sure there is to that question. That's a good point, and that's the kind of thing we want to hear, because we don't know. They also, the modified assignments can be from up to 40 hours, and they can ask for another 40. But there are some requirements involving meeting with a counselor and a few other things to get that much time.
Chair Rady, I have a question.
Please.
So when I did a couple of ride-alongs with PPB, I know that their employee system actually tracks events and things that would qualify them. There's a certain threshold if they have 3 or more of certain events and classified, such as obviously the officer-involved shooting, dead baby calls, and other things like that. And so then it mandates that check-in with the supervisor and possibly the administrative leave. When I had checked with Chief Skinner, he said that our employee tracking system does not track events like that. So we don't have the ability empirically to track a need for intervention with an officer. And so I'm just wondering how much of that Portland policy is dependent on that particular function of their system.
Do not know. We shall have to find out from Portland, I think would be best. Sergeant Jordan had recommended to me that in order to go into this policy and see if we want to change it, to establish a policy that covers all these questions regarding mental health and leave or modified assignment, that we would need to involve a wider body than the subcommittee or the commission, that it would have to involve the commission, the chief's office, the union, and the city attorney's office. Does that sound reasonable to the two of you?
Oh, we do have a hand up from Sergeant McCauley.
Please.
Yeah, Jack, I wanted to kind of touch on what Michael said. I feel like we've made like tremendous leaps forward in providing different resources and actually putting pen to paper and actually having physical procedures and policies in place to back that up, as we had spoke previously, so that as there's maybe a change of leadership into the future, that there's something there in writing, which I certainly agree with. But I have to agree with Michael. I feel like even though the culture around mental health and wellness within law enforcement has changed vastly over the last decade, I think making things mandatory is going to cause a lot of people to be concerned or rather stay quiet. So I'm always very cautious about any language in a policy or procedure that says shall or tracking, especially when it comes to mental health type things. I feel like there's a strong confidentiality interest on behalf of the officer that I would want to protect. Would be my only point regarding that policy that you read from Portland.
So there's a fine line there.
Yeah.
I mean, and I can see the circumstances where an officer is in denial. You know, I'm fine, I'm just fine. And the supervisor is going, oh, this guy is acting different. He's, you know, there's something going on with him. Um, there needs to be something here. I would assume the first step would be the supervisor talks to the officer or requests intervention by the peer support. Is that how that would work?
Yeah. So our hopes, right? In a perfect world, we have frontline supervisors, patrol sergeants that are engaged with their team, know them as well as they can, and see these flags. I think kind of what Commissioner Hawkins is saying, maybe the way that Portland does it. There's many programs out there for tracking of things, and they use AI that will show X officer has been through these number of critical incidents, whatever the call type is titled. So if it's a death investigation involving an infant, loss of life to any person, whether that be a fatal motor vehicle crash, where statistically they compile that and they come out with a report. And to the best of my knowledge, we don't have anything like that to empirically say, well, it doesn't create a red flag that pops up to that direct supervisor saying, hey, we need to check in with this person. Currently, what we have is a system of fostering relationships with direct supervisors or just members of the peer support team, where every member of the department, not just sworn staff, feels comfortable enough to go to a peer counselor and have a confidential conversation and be offered the resources that we have in place now confidentially without really, no one really has to know. There's a lot of things that our peer support counselors are doing throughout the department that I never know about. And I think that's a good thing, again, when we talk about confidentiality, because I don't think, because we also deal with, I know that this subcommittee's focus is work related things, but we also have officers who are dealing with personal life things that are affecting their ability to perform their job at work. And some of the mechanisms that we have in place for that, like I said, is that first contact with the supervisor. Hey, the supervisor knows X employee has these personal things going on. They're seeing changes in their behavior, which then our training of our frontline supervisors should clue that supervisor into, I need to reach out to peer support or a trusted person within that person's circle of influence to start that resource going. But as far as tracking that, I'm very hesitant to want to have anything in policy that tracks that, I guess, is my point.
It strikes me that we're a much smaller department than Ford.
Yeah.
And consequently, to a certain extent, it's a large family, but there's a good deal of information that may not be statistically tracked, but there's an awareness of it. Would that be a fair assumption?
Well, certainly. And Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're the second, if not third largest agency in Oregon, but we're still very small. I came from a sheriff's office where I knew everyone's spouse, significant other, kids, that all this kind of stuff. I feel that same way now. I've only been with EPD for 5 years, but I still feel we're small enough where I pretty much know I could run into Chief Skinner at the Fifth Street Public Market and say hi, and it wouldn't be like I've never seen or met a member of command staff before. So I think you're accurate in that assessment.
There might really not be any need, assuming there was a need, but
Mhm.
it would be superfluous to what we need because basically informally that's already happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's been my experience since I've been here. Even, and I've said this before, and my apologies for speaking ad nauseum about it. But when I first started at the department, I felt like a very small fish in a very large pond compared to my previous experience. and I had personal things happening, and I didn't really know anybody, and I was very quickly pulled aside and said, "Hey, we have these things available if you need extra assistance." Almost like it was just a standard operating procedure, whereas I wasn't aware at the time of any policies or procedures in place that, again, set up that red flag to say, "Hey, we need to talk to Sean about X thing because we have some report that came up, or some electronic communication that says we should probably talk to him," if I'm being clear. So I think my biggest point on this, would be education. So educating our new supervisors and our current supervisors and command staff up the chain on when to recognize these things. And those are things that Emily McCauley has already put in place with. We've had Dr. Stephanie Kahn come in and present on suicide intervention, prevention, awareness, things to look out for, substance abuse, type things. And then I think, as we're a pretty young frontline supervisor group, we've had multiple promotions over the past couple of years. And I think culturally, it's much more commonplace to say, "Hey, I feel my officer is dealing with X thing," and they know the steps to take to get them confidential help without having to document it anywhere. So I guess I'm just trying to wrap my mind around a physical policy or something in writing that would kind of, set that into the future. I just can't quite think of it at this moment.
So, Chair Rady, I think it's also important to keep in mind that Portland's under that consent decree with the DOJ, and EPD does not currently have that level of identified systemic dysfunction that's causing the officers to behave super inappropriately on the streets with the community. And obviously, we don't want to get to the point where we have to have a policy like that. But I also think that there may have been more administrative reasons why that was laid out so specifically in policy for PPB.
The one thing that I take from the Portland policy that would seem to have some application would be the wider use and longer available leave than 2 shifts or a shift and a half. Recognition of, I've heard repeatedly in presentations about policies here that the focus is very much on short-term critical stress. The first twice I've heard from the other Macaulay about how basically 48 hours and the problem is basically largely alleviated. The stress goes away, which is contrary to everything I know and what I've heard from others, including the chief. And looking at more flexible use of leave, specifically for officer wellness and how that could be done. I'm in no way wedded to, mandated policy as they have there, or tracking officers, but something in the line of opening that up more available. This is more of a tool available for officer wellness, I think would be beneficial. Commissioner Folks.
Thank you, Commissioner Rady. So was it the policy piece? I see the value of putting something in policy for future protections, if at all possible, but can we leave it somewhat generalized? So you have that specific policy on critical incidents and then other incidents specifying impact, mental, physical, emotional, and just stating, please reach out to your leadership. There are options. Personal or administrative leave may be taken up to 2 weeks with prior authorization, further discussion, something to where it's saying this is an option, this is a possibility, but to have those discussions and it's a case by case situation. I guess my question is that in existence? And would that fall in line, Sergeant McCauley and Officer Michael Clues, if that falls in line kind of with what is currently out there in procedure world?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, and Michael, if I'm cutting you off, I apologize. Um, I mean, there's several mechanisms in place currently that take on a host of different names. So the most immediate example I can think, an officer has what we would term a personal life issue, such as a family member who is sick and in need of care, and that's obviously going to affect their mental health. Through the ERC, through the city, there's going to be FMLA where they can take protected leave time that would be approved through the ERC, and through the chain of command that would be protected and confidential to a certain extent, to where they could take that time to take care of that family member. Take even, I imagine there's a mechanism to take care of themselves. Um, Commissioner Rady, if I'm hearing you correctly, talking about expanding the allowance of time on the city's dime, I personally am always for that. I feel personally that um, a lot like with mandating anything or making anything mandatory, that some officers might feel like, well, I have this day and a half, which is great. It's better than nothing, but I would sure like to take the rest of the week into my weekend to kind of take some more time, maybe go see my own mental health professional if I want, dive deeper into the different resources available in the department. That is something that I'm all for. I think that would require some conversations with EPEA, EPSA, once that becomes an entity, command, and the city as a whole, because my feeling is it would come down to money, which I say when it comes to officer health and wellness, spend all the money in the world, give them all the time in the world, because that's how we're going to keep them in the long term. And that's how we're going to stay out of burning officers out to the point where these other issues start to arise. So I'm all on board. I think what that would take is sitting down with those individuals who are directly connected to that, and look at expanding the post traumatic leave or the traumatic leave policy to expand that time allowance, and maybe have different approval mechanisms in there to where it's reviewed on a very, you know, at, at face value, to say the least, to say we can approve time off for this specific incident that would be on the city's dime. And I've ran into this. I've only been supervising the peer support team for maybe a year now, and we've had this come up multiple times where um, an officer expresses like, I need more time, and we can approve that, and then they use their own banks. My concern long term is that if they know that that's always going to be the answer, they'll just forego that burning their own time that they've earned as a benefit of being an employee, and they'll just take the day and a half and then just keep muddling through it. So I definitely think there's some area to massage that policy better and give more allowance. We just have to bring more people to the table and get that approved by the city, I think, would be the biggest crux.
Amen. Commissioner Folks.
Thank you again, Mr. Rady. So I was also just thinking this also kind of, I mean, it falls into HR land too. So do y'all have bereavement leave? And then, there's the paid leave Oregon access possibly. So there's like all these routes. So it's not just one answer for all. Like they really could tap into FEMLA, if it's personal or related to family, that, parental care, parental leave, those types of things. So it could it sounds like, with the right conversations and finding out what those options are, time can be figured out if needed from a variety of different ways.
Certainly.
And just knowing that folks have those options and making sure they understand what those are is kind of the big thing, it sounds like. And it sounds like that the PCERT team is really good about spreading that around. And there's a lot more behind the scenes, when employees are talking to each other, that they're learning those types of things. Is that kind of that's what it sounds like, is that folks are pretty good about understanding what's out there.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's I think that, again, to call back, a lot of it's education. So we have a lot of new officers, a lot of new supervisors, and sometimes we have to lean on the senior people within our department, such as Michael, who's been around and knows all the different nuances and different scenarios that have happened, and being willing to have those conversations and direct those employees to the proper resource. I know I've authorized time off that at the end of the day, it wasn't my place to authorize, and I would do it again. But no, it just a lot of times, unfortunately, I think it comes down to what's in place, and setting precedent sometimes becomes an issue. I think out of the want to overwhelmingly support employees and give them the time that they need, we always, kind of from a management standpoint, have to make sure that that's not being abused. So how we work through that is, it's a relationship with EPEA, it's a relationship with EPSA, it's a relationship with the ERC and command staff to effectively communicate these things while keeping confidentiality paramount.
Sounds good. Michael, would you care to add anything to that?
In the end, all this comes down to is money. That's it. It comes down to money, because I believe people will be given the time off if they are to burn their own time, because they don't want to pay for it and they expect the department to pay for it. It all comes down to money in the end. And the fine balance is going to be, what triggers it. I know that somebody was talking about earlier about car crashes. I happen to know a little bit about those and the bad things that you see. But you know what? Different incidences affect people differently. Just because somebody couldn't fathom the idea of going to a car crash and seeing some mangled body there, doesn't mean that everybody is going to have a traumatic response to it. I'm probably weird. We all know this, but that is not something that doesn't concern me necessarily. Where there are other incidences that are far more traumatic to me. And the biggest thing here when it comes to mental health, and the part that I want to make sure that we emphasize is, while it's all fine and good that we're dealing with the acute traumatic incidences here, which is what the discussion is kind of about, the reality is that a lot of the traumatic incidences are low, not stress, but low intensity, but over a very, very long period of time. Those are the things that really are going to be the ones that are going to be affecting our folks the most. So, and obviously it's a combination of both, right? I mean, it's not going to be one or the other, it's going to be both.
That's a very important point, that you cannot set up AI and score incidents, and if you have two of these and one of those, that you reach this threshold, it is going to be different for each person and requires clear understanding of that and a very flexible policy. As far as I can see, unless anyone has any further questions, we have a pretty clear picture here at this point. And I believe the next step will be to initiate discussions with the city and the chief's office about this. There's a couple other, besides money, there is one other issue I believe that comes into this. And Chief Skinner pointed to it in one discussion I had with him, which is the more people who are off on leave for one reason or another, the less officers there are left to fill the ranks and do the job. And there is a certain, everyone would do better with a little time off. And police work for many is exceedingly stressful, and many would benefit from a fair amount of time off. And there has to be a certain point where you say, well, we still need somebody out on the street, so you're going to have to go. But I think all the points that Sergeant McCauley made about these are people we have these are human beings. They are public servants, and they take the stress because they are working for us, and it injures them in one way or another, to one degree or another. And we have an obligation to take care of people who work for us. Secondly, we put a lot of money into training, selection, and development of officers and burning them up and throwing them away and getting new ones is inefficient, a bad use of resources as well as being human. And so therefore, what we invest in maintenance of these public tools pays off in not having to buy new ones soon and having ones that work efficiently in the way we want. So we can fight for it on that basis and realize that there's not unlimited money nor unlimited time available. How shall we go about initiating these discussions? I'm open to suggestions. I may have a couple. Well, first we have to take it to the commission and get the approval of the police commission to proceed with this. And then I think we can look to the leadership of the commission, who are on screen at the moment, to carry it to the city from there, and for our city council members as well, and set up this discussion. I assume the union would want to be part of this discussion?
It's either at that point or at the back end, so it's probably easier on the front end.
Agreed. Do we have anything further on this topic that anyone would like to bring up? Okay. In that case, moving the meeting along even faster than we planned.
Jack,
Okay.
sorry to interrupt. We
Yes.
did not approve the April minutes, so I just want to get that on there before you wrap up your meeting.
I couldn't quite make that out. You're breaking up a little.
You did not approve or review the April minutes, so you'll need to do that before you wrap up your meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I skipped right over that one. That must be because I looked through them and couldn't find anything to object to. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes unless anyone has any corrections they would like entered into the minutes. Commissioner Folks.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion. It is seconded. There would be no further discussion. I will rule that the motion is passed unanimously. So we concluded that item. Now it's time for the celebration. This subcommittee has met for 2 years on a very important topic. We have developed the fact that the department would benefit from having one consolidated set of policy regarding law enforcement, mental health, and well-being. We have reviewed the policies in numerous other departments and discussed this with people from outside of Eugene who have worked on similar things. Sergeant Jordan has whipped together a really nice piece of work containing most of the policy recommendations that we've come up with and agreed on. And we've had enormous contributions, first from Holly, who is always there and always doing the work that is needed, from Commissioner Hawkins, who initiated this subcommittee, pushed it through and got city council approval and has guided it most of its way, from commissioners who are no longer with us, Booker and Parham and Lemons, I believe, was on the committee before, and their contributions, and for Commissioner Folks, who joined us just recently and has made a great contribution. I've done what I was asked to do and help move it along, and I think we have accomplished what this subcommittee set out to do. We will have some useful policy that will help maintain the progress that has been made in this department on supporting officer mental health and well-being. And I think bravo for all of us. Well done. Well done.
So Chair Rady, let me just say that when this committee first started and I began meeting with the chief, I asked him what his definition of success would be. And he said it would be to have an embedded qualified mental health professional at EPD that is available and competent and able to handle the needs of EPD. And so even though we didn't do the work to make that happen, I consider that a huge success because it's happened And it's something that we definitely had our sights on from the very beginning. Also, I think there needs to be a whole lot of things extended to Chief Skinner and to the officers who have been willing to open up and tell us about their processes. We've been granted a very high level of transparency into the current processes at EPD, as well as suggestions and recommendations on how things can be improved. I was able to go on, it feels like a jillion ride-alongs. And as soon as officers found out that I was on the Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Committee, it really kind of helped frame a lot of their interactions during the ride along, as far as their reaction to me as a police commissioner, and also the work that the police commission does as a whole. And so I think gratitude to EPD overall is definitely in order.
Amen. Would anyone else like to add anything else before we adjourn?
Thank you for allowing me to speak at these meetings, and I feel like you're invested in the overall health and wellness of the department, which Commissioner Rady, as you said, is only going to benefit the community. If we have officers who feel supported and taken care of, then they're going to better serve the community, the department, and then themselves personally. So I appreciate the work that all of you have put in having these meetings and having these conversations and keeping it alive. I don't think otherwise it would be where it's at today.
Excellent. If there are no further comments, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. I think we can be proud of the work we've done. And we will not be troubling the commission with a lot more reports from the subcommittee. So, well done, folks. Thank you.
Thank you for stepping up to chair for the last few months, Jack.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.